Good morning. Let our Rumble stragglers find their way in. The other angry dog tore his bicep muscle. Wow. I will resist the temptation to make an age-related joke. Or will I? Good morning, everybody. I'm in full control of the music and the volume. Be not afraid. You forgot the warm-ups before tearing that by. Yeah, that's got to be it. So good morning, everybody. Norm is still on his West Coast foray. He has been doing some pretty cool stuff. I think before he left, he disclosed that he was doing the Adam Carolla and what's the big chin? The guy with the big chin. Jay Leno? Yeah. His comedy camp, or their comedy camp, rather. And he is finishing that up. He's had quite a lot of fun. Has not stopped him from doing a few interviews here and there with reporters, especially now that we have more going on in the Proud Boys case. But suffice it to say that this week you are stuck with me and whomever I elect to bring on. So last week, if you weren't with us on Friday, or if you were unable to listen to the full thing, we had Mark Randazza, First Amendment attorney and litigator, join us for like 50 minutes or something like that. And we had a great time. Do go back and listen to that if you have not already. And then this week may have a trick or two up my sleeve. Sent out a few texts and should be getting a few people on here probably Thursday, Friday in particular. And if we could squeeze someone in tomorrow, we will. But Norm may call in today. He may not. Again, he is on West Coast time. So right now it's 5:03 in the morning for him. But he does want to discuss what leads this video, which is Garland's DOJ appealing the sentences in the convicted Proud Boys. But before we do that, speaking of Norm, I'm going to put something else on the screen here. We do have our Law and Legitimacy Fantasy League. And going into last night, here, I think I'll be able to share it now. There we go. Yeah, going into last night, as you can see, I'm on the left here, Robinson, Pollard, and Allen, LP. Norm held a pretty healthy lead, pretty sizable lead there. So, had a couple players left, Tony Pollard, Keenan Allen, maybe you've heard of them. Also had my kicker. I felt pretty confident headed into the night. ESPN was giving me 50-50 odds, and I'll take that. But the heartbreak truly is the fact that this is what I woke up to this morning, because who has time to wait for an entire game to play out on Monday night? So here it is. Norm beat me, okay? He did. I don't feel great about it. I'm not happy about it, especially because it was 1 point. I suspect that he'll want to talk about it some more, and I have nothing to say. They are who we thought they were, and we let them off the hook. Anyway, enough of that. Today, we will be looking at specifically the Department of Justice's appeal in the Proud Boys case. Now, the reason that this is, high profile as it is because we also have to talk about the gag order issued by the judge in the Trump case, the January 6th Trump case. And then we may also look to some more stuff dealing with the United Auto Workers strike. But I wanted to bring this up specifically because Norm is actually quoted in this Washington Post article. And let's see. BTL, good morning. Freedom Lover, good morning in the cloud. I see you. T-Girl, yep. It wasn't great, It wasn't great. And, it's not like they didn't perform well. They just didn't perform well enough. And if I'm talking to them in the locker room, I don't know how much I've got to say. It's just they didn't want it bad enough, Anyway, good morning, everybody over there on Rumble and YouTube. Let's see. Good morning, Mari. So the Washington Post, Norm, he contacts me yesterday, and he says that a reporter from the Washington Post had sent him an email asking for a comment. So we'll get into this to the case, and then we'll get to Norm's comment. Actually, maybe I'm not going to bury the lead here. I want to just get to that. It's here. Here it is on the screen. Attorney Norm Pattis, who represented Real and Pizzola at their sentencing. So I'm fairly certain that is incorrect. Washington Post. Joe Biggs and Real were his clients. So if Tom Jackman, if you're listening to this for whatever reason, or if anybody wants to maybe send him a note. Yeah, it was Real and Joseph Biggs, Biggs. Anyway, back to the quote. Said in an email after the notice was filed, quote, Merrick Garland is unhinged, period. Call him the Inspector Javert of the DOJ. He should take up bungee jumping. This is no longer my government. So yes, this is the Washington Post. This is real. This is a real quote, and I have verified with Norm. So this is not something that the Washington Post took out of context. That is the full quote, in fact. Nothing more, nothing less, in that order, down to the syllable, down to the punctuation. And I love it, just to put it back on the screen here, because this isn't anything that he has not said here on the program. But Merrick Garland is unhinged, period. Call him the Inspector Javert of the DOJ. He should take up bungee jumping. This is no longer my government. Why might you might want to ask, would Norm be so fired up? Well, we've talked about this ad nauseum. Norm was in the trenches representing Joseph Biggs in the January 6th proceedings for a 4-month trial. 4 months. And we talked all along the way. The expectation originally was that the trial would be done sort of in early January, after the first couple of weeks of January, and it stretched nearly to the end of April, and then Norm had to go back for sentencing thereafter. And one thing in particular that we discussed on the stream was the nature of the sentencing, right? In particular, that there was a plea offer made by the DOJ to the various defendants in this conspiracy case, or their respective conspiracy cases, and that the plea offers that predated the trial, most obviously, were substantially less than what the judge ordered, and what the judge ordered in almost every single case of the January 6th defendants, or the Proud Boys January 6th defendants, were sentences that were roughly half of what the DOJ pursued, right? So in the case of someone like Enrique Tarrio, who got 22 years in prison, right? That was roughly half of what the DOJ pursued in his case, right? In the case of Joseph Biggs, Zachary Real, Dominic Pizzola, this is the same all the way around. And as the Washington Post points out here, they say that Enrique Tarrio received the longest sentence yet imposed for the January 6th Capitol riot, and 3 other members received more than 15 years in prison. And more than 15 years is like roughly 5 years more than the maximum term of maximum sentence that any one defendant would have served pursuant to the plea agreement that they were offered. And they subsequently turned that down. And I bring that up just to give a longer view of this, but also to just kind of stretch these timelines a little bit, right? It's one thing to think, 33 years in prison or 22 years in prison, et cetera. 33 years is perhaps what the DOJ pursued in some cases. 40 years is what they pursued in some cases. But it's something else to know that they also at the same time offered things as as few as 6 years, 7 years, 8 years in prison on the front end, right? So now we're at the other end of this timeline. So we're not really negotiating between the 22 and the 33. It's more like, the 6 and the 33. And the reason that this is really odd in retrospect is that this is, it's not often that the prosecution appeals sentences after it has secured a conviction. And the question naturally is, what is the motivation to pursue an appeal in this regard? I'm going to bring up Gavin McInnes's X profile here, and he actually he took the 1-page filing from the DC District Court's database yesterday, and it is the notice of appeal. And I'm not withholding, he's not withholding, and I'm not withholding any other documents in this. This is the entire thing for all of the defendants, for each of the defendants that they are appealing in January 6th, their sentence. This is all that is given, right? There's no justification, there's no legal argument, there's nothing substantiated therein that would give rise to whomever is reading this to know perhaps why an appeal would be taken up or pursued in such a case. So it's interesting, right? The government was successful, and I'm going to see if I can blow up a little bigger for you, but it's kind of wild looking. The government secured a conviction, and as it stands right now, it intends to appeal those convictions, or not the convictions, but the sentences as handed down by the judge. And we went through the sentencing guidelines. I do encourage all of you to go back and listen to some of those streams that Norm discussed during the sentencing phase. And Dawn offers this. Dawn, you offer fascistic fear mongering is the motive. I don't necessarily disagree. I think the problem that we have in taking this on its face as something justifiable is that justice under those plea agreements was substantially less than the sentences that were handed down post conviction. Not to mention that there are convictions that are going to be appealed anyway, and some have already been appealed in the January 6th prosecutions. Not necessarily with the Proud Boys, but they will be. And the nature of those appeals are going to hinge on the fact that the seditious conspiracy charge was wielded in such a way by the prosecution that is wholly unrecognizable through past precedent, through past jurisprudential precedent. Good Lord. That what the convictions hinged on was the government's ability to articulate to a jury that the defendants charged with seditious conspiracy need not have made any sort of overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy, at least with respect to their intent or their communication with one another. That there did not have to be any pre-planning. It could have happened spontaneously. That a conspiracy could have occurred spontaneously. That was the whole of the conviction, the whole of the use and the wielding of that tool by the DOJ. It's not enough that they got 20 plus years for Enrique Tarrio or Joseph Biggs, Zach Reel. They need more. So, Dawn, to your point, I think stands to reason that perhaps fear-mongering is indeed the point. It is the point that it is not enough that you suffer, but that we must grind you into a fine powder. I don't know what the chat thinks. There is an aspect of this that makes me feel as though these gentlemen are martyrs in that way. What's up, Lawyer Will? T-Girl says, protesters outside Schumer's house were arrested. Protesters outside Supreme Court justices' houses, ? Again, valid. But in both instances, valid. And in both instances, we could go back also the way that Norm does. Where are the charges? Where are the conspiracy charges for any of those who were involved in the summer riots of 2020, right? There was loss of life, tremendous loss of property, huge imposition to the goings on of a civil society, right? In the midst of what was considered to be, um, a deathly pandemic, right? So Don says, I applaud Norm for standing up to the fascists, given the risks involved. Norm is definitely courageous. And again, just for those of you that may have come in a little late, I will fix the screen here so that so at least that's a little bit bigger for you. Not used to doing this stuff solo. So again, Attorney Norm Pattis, who represented Real and Pizzola. Again, Washington Post. It's not Pizzola. It's Biggs. Biggs was his primary client. Biggs is who he actually defended during the trial. And then Real is who he represented during the sentencing along with Biggs. So I don't want any of our viewers or listeners to get that mixed up. It's not Pizzola. It is Biggs and Real. Attorney Norm Pattis, who represented Real and Biggs at their sentencing, said in an email after the notice was filed, quote, Merrick Garland is unhinged, period. Call him the Inspector Javert of the DOJ. He should take up bungee jumping. This is no longer my government. When we get a chance to talk with Norm, he has not actually sent me a text this morning. I tried to send him one just to see if he wanted to get on around 8:15, 8:20. If he does call in, I'll certainly take the call, but I also don't want to squander the opportunity to talk about this over the phone. My personal preference, and I think the preference of those of you in the watching the streams would be that in due course, Norm will appear here and be able to talk in longer form and answer questions rather than just call in and acknowledge it. I think that his quote in the Washington Post is sufficient for you to know that he has already addressed this. This is on his radar. Janet Smith asks, why isn't the whole legal profession embarrassed to death by all the lawyers paid by tax dollars committing acts of communism? It's a fairly loaded question, but I understand the motivation for the question 100%. The practice of law, and I was actually sending a note to someone else this morning, another attorney that has appeared on the show a few times. And what I'd like to talk about with that potential guest is just the nature of the attorney-client relationship, and maybe an imperfect corollary, but also, what we're seeing going on in the medical profession between doctor and patient and the doctor-patient relationship. But the easy thing to do and the risk-averse thing to do in the practice of law is to keep one's head down. And if one does not necessarily agree with the prevailing orthodoxy, simply do not express such contrarian views, right? Do not depart from the norm. Law by its very nature is but the practice of law by its nature, at least in my world, sort of the transactional practice is driven in large part by risk mitigation, right? Which attracts people who are fairly risk averse, mostly conservative in terms of their decision making. And to ask that a practice, right, that a federal bar or individual state bars comprised of these licensed attorneys, it's one thing for them, for an attorney, Janet, just to use a term from your question. It's one thing for one of us to be embarrassed by the other lawyers practicing on behalf of the government and wielding that office in the way that they are. Is something completely separate for lawyers to step in and compromise and risk their own reputation and earnings ability, et cetera. And that's what makes Norm so special, right? I think I was saying the other day, someone asked me when we were doing the live Q&A, or maybe it was, I think I said that I really wanted to get this show to a point where we could retire Norm from the practice of law. And that was met with, I don't want to say too intense a criticism, but a lot of pushback for sure. People are afraid that someone like Norm would disappear from the cause, right? And I understand that, but the issue is necessarily that there aren't a whole lot of successful lawyers, and Norm meets the traditional definition of success. It's not a principled appeal to something that, he's a man of conviction. He absolutely is, but he also is wildly successful. But there are too few of him that are mentoring young attorneys rising through the ranks and offering them the ability to act as a succession plan to the likes of him. So for that reason, I think it's important that in supporting the show, you recognize that there is a linear pathway to answering your question, Janet, that the next generation of lawyers right now, as we can see it, is not necessarily showing signs of life in the way that your question requires, right? Dawn says, I'm in Minneapolis after the show. I'll survey my grandparents' old formerly Swedish neighborhood, which was destroyed in 2020 by the mostly peaceful protesters. Omar represents it now. Uncle Pat, Garland needs to be drug out behind the woodshed and stomped a mud hole in him, spoken like a true North Carolinian. Janet Smith, lawyers have families that will suffer if this continues. They must stop looking in the rearview mirror. Again, I understand. I also think that question over-indexes on the importance of family to young people in this day and age. And that's not a criticism of you, Janet. I'm not one of those people who shares that view. The U.S. government reminds me of the game Frogger. You're my hero, says this should interest you, Mike, ... What's on the other side of that? Let's see. Jackson Barrett on Rumble. How can anyone conspire to overthrow the government by overturning an election when neither could be accomplished on January 6th? I think I love the question, and I thank you for continuing to ask that. Submission to the bar is a form of self-censorship corruption. Eastman is being railroaded in California by the bar. Well, look, in Georgia, Jackson, in Georgia, we have, what is it? Cheesebro and the Kraken. What's her name? I always forget her name for some reason. Anyway, they're also being charged criminally for the advice and counsel that they gave to President Trump and Trump's team during the days and weeks after the election was called, right? So it takes recognition, and that I think this is my key interest in a lot of this stuff, is that I take nothing away from the attorneys for the DOJ. By all accounts, right? Those from Norm and those from other attorneys situated and active in the case of the Proud Boys. The DOJ, especially in the DC circuit, they are among the elite, right? They are elite practitioners of law, very skilled, very professional. They know what they're doing. So to criticize the attorneys on that side, it fairly, or I think effectively, is to also acknowledge that they are unfettered or unrestrained by the sort of cultural overlay that the other side is, right? That those on the defense table are, right? And that makes for an uneven playing field for sure. You can have the most talented attorneys in the world on the over on the defense table, but ultimately those intangible qualities, I think, harm everything. Dawn says, do you think the backlash at universities against support for, quote, Palestinian supporters will have some long-term positive effect? Big donors and alumni are angry. I'll put this on the screen. I don't know. And I've been thinking about this. I think I would like for there to be some recognition that that the universities have begun harboring by and through their sort of coddling nature of young people. They have really become, like, I guess, just containment areas for unevolved and uncritical thought about the world. They're not really producing anybody on average that is going out and able to do for themselves, right? More than in an entrepreneurial way. I don't know that, what I've seen thus far, though, is that the backlash is of the same type and variety that we've seen over speech issues generally over the last several years. And that's to take nothing away from what I think of the speech being, think of the speech on certain sides of this. But it is to say that I haven't really seen, I have seen the same top-down response by those with institutional power and leverage to sort of silence, shame, and then affect the economic outlook for those engaging in what amounts to purely speech, even if it's speech that that one necessarily hates. And I think my shortcoming on Friday's show was I think I certainly wanted to move away from the Israel-Palestine war at the moment and discuss the TikTok and the social media stuff. I think one shortcoming of my interview or my discussion with Mark is really putting the First Amendment in the focus for that, because it appears as though we've learned zero lessons coming out of COVID. We've learned nothing from the last several years, and I use Ye as a glowing example of how little we have learned, just based on the response, the coordinated response of state and private industry subsequent to his remarks and his appearances on different shows and stuff like that. So I don't know. I would like to, in a way, it's as if the censorship regime radicalized a lot of the younger people that were looking at it in the same way I was, which is why I was very critical of, in the early days of the Palestine stuff, saying that, not blaming per se the likes of those institutions like the ADL, but acknowledging affirmatively that there is a clear consequence to American culture when you silence the people who could express their disapproval of the mechanism by which censorship is levied, right? And we never know how that sort of subjugation is going to create pressure points in the future. And this is an example of that. Unfortunately, the example of the pressure points created by past censorship and past ham-handed handling of really, really sensitive issues here domestically is now coming back to bite all of us in the ass, because we're watching our educational institutions show themselves for who they truly are, right? And who do we have to blame for that? It's a question that needs to be answered without saying who is right or wrong, right? Because speech is speech, but there is something that reflects a deeper issue. So, Dawn, I don't know if that in any way answers your question, but it gets at, I think, the essence of what we should be looking at to try and assess whether, big donors sort of quick efforts to put pressure on the universities is the best way to look at it. Imperious, we should discuss Second Amendment. That's an important legal issue. Look at the cases in the Ninth and how they are completely ignoring their own rules. Imperious, I think we had someone else asking about Second Amendment more as well. Sydney Powell in the cloud, thank you. Feelings on the Project 65, Mike T. I have looked at Project 65 and have had this on the docket for Norm and I to discuss, so I'm going to decline or just defer on that answer for now. I will say it's troubling that it exists, but we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks. It's me again, says smash the thumbs up. I'm Team USA. Jackson Barrett says build Rendazistan. If you missed that part of the show last week, absolutely, Rendazistan is not somewhere that if you are weak-willed and weak-minded that you would want to live. You're My Hero says child addiction to social media lawsuit survived motion to dismiss based on design and features. You're My Hero. If you have that case, the name of that case or a case caption, anything, please put it in the chat or send it to us via email padispodcast@gmail.com, or just send it to us on X @LawPodDaily. I would love to look into that for sure. Let's see. Gold Store CT, smash that like button. It makes a difference with algorithms to help spread the viewers. That's right. That's right. Hit the like button, please. State licensure is a huge problem. Yes. There's a lot of middle management in America right now. I think that we can agree on that. I think truly that may be the biggest problem, right? Is sort of the boring nature of the wielding of power, right? On a day-to-day basis. The instances of the Proud Boys and January 6th is one clear shining example of some sort of systemic failures in U.S. Law and justice. But there are deprivations of due process and entitlements and the freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution every day and by any manner of state or federal agencies. I think the problem necessarily is that we as a society have been okay with congressional delegation of oversight over various aspects of our lives. And too few of us, myself included, are informed enough to know who staffs these boards and commissions, how often they meet, what their business and scope truly is, what decisions they're making, how they're funded. Too few of us are involved in that sort of very basic civil way. And I think that perhaps maybe an element of this show should be to push people to just consider doing those small things, just showing up and learning. Perhaps could help in the long term. Imperious, do you feel that with the retraction of Chevron, this may help the administrative state enact less control? I think that it throws it temporarily into a gray area. It certainly positive. I mean, retracting back from Chevron deference, and I'd certainly want to spend more time on Chevron going forward and what that means. But the problem with Chevron is that it assumes that the administrative agency or the regulator is competent to apply standards and restrictions and certain burdens on industry members, whatever the industry is. And in my world, what most often is the case is that assumption is wrong, right? That those who are bestowed with that unilateral power to revoke a license or cancel a license or impose obligations that are the effective equivalent of cancellation or rejection just based on the economic burden that one must bear to comply. Too few people in those positions have ever built anything for themselves. Too few of those people have any idea how the economic system works and what their true role is in terms of a public policy objective, or what that institution was designed to do, and how their smaller, more granular actions within the agency support and go to the effort in good faith that institution is designed to carry out. And we get the excesses of that sort of permanent salaried state employee or federal employee reality, right? We live in a time now where it's nearly impossible to terminate or furlough federal or state employees. In the private sector, I'm not even going to go into that right now, but one must understand that there is no economic incentive on the rank and file, middle management, administrative staff and employees to quickly move through cases or to adjudicate things in a good faith and competent manner, right? With some understanding that we should be there to support business and build and support those who are innovating. There is none of those things that exist out in the market as between private people. That's all. It's as if it's all walled off there, and any element of that strikes at the issue that I think a lot of these agencies depend on, which is making sure that their budget allocation only grows, never shrinks. Anyway, we're way past time. I'm going to quickly mention this and ask the question for everybody here. Let's see. So we're still under a strike between UAW and the big three. So that's Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. And my question, I think Ford and the big three, they're saying, we can't afford to pay you guys what you're asking to be paid, right? It's just not in the cards. What this article and what I'm not reading anywhere is a recognition, because we've talked about the nature of this being kind of EV related, right? And I'm just gonna kind of tease this for a future stream. I don't know when we'll necessarily get back to it, but it's at least worth asking. Tesla doesn't get the federal tax credit anymore, right? There aren't any tax incentives for one to buy a Tesla. I think they've crossed that 250,000 vehicles sold threshold. But is the problem with this sort of strike and the renegotiation as simple as the fact that, I don't know, get this off my screen. I don't know. Is it as simple as the fact that the Ford Mustang EV looks like a Pontiac Aztek? I mean, like, how are you going to pay any of your union employees? How are you going to negotiate to pay union employees when you can't actually sell any of these piles of trash? Has anybody looked at the Mustang EV? Is that not a direct affront to American history in and of itself? Anyway, I'm just thinking it's not as deep sometimes as like we're trying to be like, oh, so, because I'm even the one that brought up the fact that there was a Biden administration placed monitor within UAW, right? Pursuant to a consent decree that they entered before Biden was elected president, right? It's possible that this administration has been levering this strike for quite a while. I think the economic impact they're saying now is like just shy of $8 billion for the 32 days that the strike has gone on. Almost 3,000 employees furloughed. Anyway, I just think that, my example of what's going on. Well, what's really going on is that you guys are putting the Ford Mustang EV out into the world. That's the problem. Tesla doesn't have this problem. I don't know. Is there a lesson in there? Am I like off the reservation here? But it's like Tesla looks great. Look good, you play good, man. That Mustang is trash. And I blame everybody else who was buying like 6-cylinder Camaros and like 6-cylinder Mustangs and stuff like all through the late 90s and 2000s. It's y'all's fault, man. You didn't even hold these guys accountable for bastardizing the American classics to begin with. I throw up in my mouth a little bit every time I see a 6-cylinder Camaro rolling down the road. No offense to anybody with a 6-cylinder Camaro, but make better decisions. Imperia says the market determines compensation, just like CA with fast food minimum wage. 25, it's all nonsense. Yeah, I just think that Ford and Stellantis and GM wouldn't have a problem negotiating for like the new union contracts, especially if they're moving into the manufacturing of electric vehicles and changing up the way that these supply chains are created and managed, like what this value chain actually looks like. I don't think that they would be having such a problem negotiating and saying from a perspective, we can afford that, if they actually felt like they're going to be able to sell this trash. Like, because that's what it is right now. That's all I'm saying. If there was some sort of sales velocity at the end of the value chain, if dealerships weren't having a problem moving these Pontiac Aztec redos, right, there wouldn't be such an issue. Like, yeah, we're doing great. Let's go ahead and get this renegotiated. We got vehicles to sell. That's just that's my quick take. Anyway, that's it. I'll leave you guys alone on that. But think about it. You know what I mean? Think about it. We will be back tomorrow. My promise to you is that I won't talk about Mustang EVs, number one. And number two, that I will endeavor to have someone that you know and respect back on the program with me. Norm will be out the rest of this week, and we will have him call in intermittently, but I'm going to do my best in his stead to let him have some time away. And this is a good trip for him to do that. So anyway, thank you everybody for being here. As some of our viewers and streamers have already told you, please hit the thumbs up on this video. Please make sure you're subscribed. You can find us on X at LawPod Daily. You can find us on YouTube and Rumble. And you can also find us on your podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, Audible, wherever you find podcasts. We will be back tomorrow morning. Make sure when you follow us on LawPod Daily to say something. Say, hey, maybe console me for losing to Norm by like a point or whatever that was. Kind of wild. Anyway, see you guys tomorrow.